the Caribbean, that beautiful chain of islands that is seated right there in the tropics, that as it will connects North America to South America, these lovely small islands that all seem to be little pieces of paradise, and I live there. Well, not in all of them, unfortunately. I just live in one. Now, the thing is, if you are part of the Caribbean, it would have really been nice if being part of the Caribbean means that, you regularly go right in between all of those islands. It's like easily accessible. These islands aren't that far away, so it should be pretty easy to just go from one island to the next. It actually is not that easy. I mean, you can get a flight, but the cost is a bit prohibitive. And then with the recent closure of one of the Caribbean's main inter-island air travel services, LIAT, that means that there's even less ability to directly fly in between some of these islands. For some of these islands that are right next to each other, if you want to go from here to there, you have to go from here to Miami, then to there. And that is kind of very inconvenient. So some of the Caribbean leaders, some of the CARICOM leaders have been talking about this recently and trying to figure out ways to solve these problems. CARICOM meaning the Caribbean Community, that political organization that attempts to bring some unity among the Caribbean states, at least among some Caribbean states. Recently, we hosted in Trinidad and Tobago one of these Caribbean leaders in our Manufacturers Association, was it their awards night or something to that effect? One young Mr. Dickon Mitchell, right? It's kind of sometimes tricky to remember that name, but all you have to remember is it's the same name as their previous Prime Minister. Dr. Mitchell lost younger Dickon Mitchell, and it's the same Mitchell name leading over there in Grenada. But he came over here and he was, in his speech that he gave at that event, he was talking about those issues, about the difficulty in being able to get from one island to the next. He spoke about how difficult it may have been for him himself to reach right from Grenada to Trinidad and Tobago if he didn't have access to some special services that the regular citizens and regular population in the Caribbean would not have access to. And he was talking that if we are interested in trade, if we are interested in, getting that inter-island commerce going, that's one of the most important things, and I agree. He isn't talking this only by himself, though. There has been some other talk about this recently. I believe the new CARICOM head, the Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda, he was talking about trying to decrease the barriers to inter-island travel too. So we're going to see what these men had to say and what possible solutions there are in the works, if any are in the works at all. Before we go into those stories, if you like this kind of content, if you like this video, hit that like button. If you are not yet subscribed, now may be a good time to click that subscribe button too. And yes, please do hit the like button. It does help. It really does help boost the algorithm, send the video out there to more people. So please do hit that like button. Tell me what you think in the comments, and let's dive into this. Grenada Prime Minister, stop the excuses. Fix CARICOM travel. Prime Minister of Grenada, Dickon Mitchell, says travel within CARICOM must be fixed and that the excuses which allow the issues to persist must stop. He was giving the feature address at the TTMA, Trinidad and Tobago Manufacturers Association's 2022 award ceremony on Tuesday night at the Hyatt Regency, Port of Spain. He began his speech by praising TTMA President Trisha Kusal, and he was saying it was quite easy to say no given the challenges for him to travel out from Grenada. It was quite easy for him to say no to the invitation to come and give this speech there. He went on to say, I'm only here because I'm the Prime Minister of Grenada, because I can come on the aircraft used by the regional security system to fly me in and out of Trinidad. Otherwise, it will literally require me to spend an entire week, and the options for getting to Trinidad require me to get to Miami and then fly back to Trinidad. So you would have to spend a week in traveling and travel further away from Trinidad to the United States in Miami, and then from Miami travel down to Trinidad. That is pretty ridiculous, and you could see why nearly the average person, if you just wanted to go to Trinidad to just vacation a bit, and you have to go to Miami then to come to Trinidad, you'll just stay in Miami. You're not going to go through all of that. He was saying that the only way he could travel between the islands is because he has access to the regional security system, which is a security system aiming to provide security for the small islands in the Lesser Antilles, and they all come together to pool some resources, and then they would have an aircraft, of course, and that aircraft could be used by the heads of state in those islands. And the Prime Minister was saying that is how difficult it is to travel within the region. He said, since trade was being discussed at the ceremony, if we can't even move people, then it's obvious that we can't trade. He said he feels the pain of people in the region, especially as he can only travel freely within the region because of the RSS. He said, although the COVID pandemic created significant challenges in the region, we collectively need to stop making excuses and start taking action and putting the resources where it is required. He added, we don't ask whether the roads are profitable. I don't think we ask ourselves, are we making money from the asphalt in the roads? So it's difficult for me to understand why we ask, are we making money from airlines? If we recognize the importance of trade. Now, the importance of trade is in making money. So if something is unprofitable, then that's why it's not done in trade too. I understand the sentiment he's saying. I agree with him for the most part, but to make it seem like whether it's profitable or not isn't a consideration to be had, I disagree with that, because you have to look at the profitability of the thing. He's saying, well, we don't check the profitability of the asphalt, and that's actually not true. People do check the cost of the road. I remember in Trinidad and Tobago, when we were talking about building the highway down to Point Fortin, the cost of the highway was a big issue. People were pointing out that it was one of the most expensive highways per meter or per mile, however they were measuring it, in the world, and that was a problem. And I think that should be a problem. If a roadway is just too expensive so that the usage of it isn't going to pay for it, then we should not do it. The problem with the inter-island transport isn't just profitability. It's checking if it will pay for itself. So yes, it may be expensive to do it, but is it possible for it to pay for itself? And is it something that you don't necessarily need to subsidize? The government doesn't have to go and buy aircraft. There are private aircraft carriers there. All you need to do is remove the barriers so that they will be willing to do it themselves. One of the main barriers that many people have pointed out within the Caribbean to inter-island transport, and it's not the first time people have been speaking about this, it's the taxes. And he is speaking there like, we really need to do something as a region. Well, him as Prime Minister of Grenada and as a member of CARICOM, this is something that he can do. The taxes on the airfare is a big part of the issue. There's an article from 2 years ago, 2020, when the former Prime Minister of Grenada was talking about, as it were, the creation of this issue that is causing this new Prime Minister to have to take the RSS to fly out of Grenada. Grenada to reduce airline ticket taxes. Prime Minister Dr. Keith Mitchell has disclosed that Grenada will soon be reducing taxes on airline tickets as part of measures aimed at encouraging intra-regional travel within the Caribbean community. He said that this is being done as the government implements various strategies to encourage travel within the region. Speaking on the pending liquidation of regional carrier Liat, Mitchell said that there are other airlines which will be filling the void left by Liat, which suspended its services in April after most regional states shut down airports as part of measures aimed at containing COVID-19. So that's another issue with COVID-19. If the measures taken by political leaders led to the shuttering of one of the few inter-island airbuses, airships that regularly service the smaller islands, if that happened because of the reaction to COVID-19, not because of the virus itself, because of the reaction to COVID-19, we could probably, that's another thing when you're evaluating whether the right decisions were made back then. That's another thing to keep in mind. We lost an air carrier because of the reaction and decisions made. Maybe it was a worthy loss, maybe it wasn't. That's something to consider. But back then, the former Prime Minister of Grenada was saying that what they are attempting to do is reduce the taxes, because the taxes are a bit prohibitive on people traveling into Ireland. And I remember reading an article, I did a story on this a while ago, a couple months ago, when this story was a bit more fresh. Regional leaders cutting air taxes to encourage intra-Caribbean tourism. Mike Holder, a Barbadian accountant, proudly recalls the days in the 1990s through the early noughties when he and a group of friends would on a whim book a flight and spend a weekend in St. Lucia. Back then, a return ticket between the countries cost under US $150. Attractive enough for Mike and his friends to engage in those weekend getaways between 6 and 8 times a year. You can understand how you could just get on a plane Friday evening after work and come back either early Monday morning or late Sunday evening, he told the Sunday Gleaner. Over time, as governments imposed a series of taxes and charges on airline tickets, sending fares ballooning beyond the reach of many, Mike and his friends cut back on the weekend trips until they stopped going altogether. I have not been to St. Lucia since 2007, stated Mike, who explained that even then it was for work purposes. As I said, $1,000 nested over a weekend didn't make sense. Mike is not alone in this. For nearly 2 decades, virtually every Caribbean national or resident who travels for business or leisure has complained about the high cost of travel across the region. In many instances, these taxes account for up to 60% of the airfare, pushing the cost of travel to neighboring countries past the fares above those to Miami or New York. That is totally ridiculous. 60% of the airfare you're paying to travel from Trinidad to Grenada is going to the government. The government is extorting you for wanting to travel in between your fellow Caribbean islands. That sounds ridiculous to me. And for some of these same governments to say that they're very interested in increasing the amount of travel, the amount of communication, how well we deal with each other in between the islands, it seems kind of like you're being dishonest. Because if you wanted that to happen, reduce the price. And I saw a former Bahamian Minister of Tourism, I believe, was speaking a lot on these issues. An article, they're solving the Caribbean air tax problem, from Carib Journal. This article was, is there a date on this? No, they do not have a date on this, actually. But I suppose it would have been from around a year ago, judging by the details they put into this. It's been an issue in the Caribbean for years, air taxes. But now the tide seems to be turning with the recent news that the Caribbean community would be launching a review of taxes on and fees on airline tickets in the region. To learn more about the issue and ways to solve it, Caribbean Journal caught up with Vincent Van der Poel Wallace, former tourism minister of the Bahamas, long one of the region's leading tourism experts and principal partner of Bedford Baker Group. All right, so we're skipping through some of these questions. What do you mean by taxes and fees on airline tickets acting counterintuitively as deterrents to maximizing tax income and employment from tourism? Listen to his answer. It is counterintuitive because some people find it difficult to understand how we can maximize tourism tax income by reducing some of the very taxes and fees that we are seeking to maximize. To quote Satchel Paige and others, often it ain't so much the things you don't know that hurt you, it's the things you know that just ain't so. So he went on to explain that many Caribbean countries, many Caribbean states have the idea that the main way to make the money from tourism, at least the main way they record making money from tourism, is from these direct taxes. You directly tax the people that are going to come in, and that's how the country makes money. But he is saying that's easy, that's money that's much easier to see. It's as it were a line item in the accounting books. It's much easier to identify that money, but it's not actually the way countries make the most money off of tourism, according to him. But every study of tourism taxes that I have seen shows that the sum of indirect and induced taxes collected from tourism related transactions exceed the sum of direct taxes. There are no government line items tracking such indirect and induced taxes as VAT payments from tourism workers at the supermarket, fuel taxes paid by taxi drivers for transfers and tours, import taxes paid by hotels for items consumed by their guests, taxes paid to trucking companies and their employees that are derived from deliveries to tourism establishments, etc., etc., etc. The quantum of all of those substantial indirect and induced taxes from tourism are invisible to Caribbean accountants because they are lumped into many catch-all accounting buckets in government systems. And I agree. Obviously, you won't be seeing some of the financial benefit when it's dispersed throughout the society, but it's the same financial benefit, and maybe there might be more. The way I think about it, if I intended to spend $10,000 on a vacation, and I go on the vacation and taxes take $5,000 from me, then I spend $5,000 less when I'm there. But if I intended to spend the $10,000 and I only spend $200 on taxes, well, I'll be spending the $9,800 on various other things in the location. I'm still going to spend the general lump sum of money I had intended to spend for that vacation. And the problem is, you might say, well, I'm still getting the money either way. It's either I tax it or you spend it otherwise inside of the society when you reach there. Maybe. But the thing is, if I look at your vacation spot and I see $200 in taxes and $9,800 I can spend on whatever I see fit when I'm there, that will be much more interesting to me than $5,000 on taxes and I can only spend $5,000 when I get there. I may say, okay, my $10,000 vacation may be better spent in another place than your tax-heavy supposed paradise. It's an opportunity cost, and I'm sure that has a large effect on it. Another question here: why have taxes and fees on airline tickets, a relatively small portion of the total trip cost, been such an impediment? Surely for the kind of visitor traveling to the Caribbean, that should not be a significant impediment. Well, that question is different from the question that may be geared towards the local Caribbean people. So, okay, if it's a foreign tourist, the amount they may be spending, a little increase in the taxes for the airfare might not be prohibitive. They could afford that. But let's see his answer. Very good question. Yes, the kind of visitors that come to the Caribbean today might not be so affected by high taxes. But Southwest Airlines, JetBlue, and Ryanair found out long ago, and every study maintains that the Southwest effect, JetBlue effect, and the Ryanair effect are still alive and well. These studies show that, other factors being equal, nothing stimulates travel like low airfares. Nothing. Studies by ITA and the Caribbean Development Bank have shown similar prospects for the Caribbean. And if you run an average of 40% of your rooms vacant every year, as we do in this region, there's much space available for those who might be stimulated to travel by better airfares. So, just that idea. Almost all of these studies in tourism have shown one of the biggest factors on stimulating people to travel more or less is the cost of airfare, as we were talking about before. That seems pretty obvious. If I have to pay $5,000 in airfare on a $10,000 vacation, I can only spend $5,000 when I'm there. If I only have to pay $1,000 on airfare, I can spend $9,000 in my $10,000 vacation. That has a big impact on me deciding where I would want to go. Obviously, even if I have a lot of money, there's still a limiting factor there. And in the Caribbean, the fact is, it's not like we are sold out year round. If it was we are sold out year round, then increase the price. Obviously, the demand is outstripping the supply, and then we'd increase the price. But if we have 40% average vacancy in most of the Caribbean all year round, then we're saying that, okay, we actually need to open up the market more. And isn't it possible that if we reduce the inter-island taxes in airfare, that 40% vacancy can possibly be filled by local Caribbean inter-island, inter-Caribbean tourism? That seems to be a viable option. Just as we were reading about the guy from Jamaica there, that accountant who used to go to St. Lucia on a regular $150 you spend and you go there for the weekend. Why don't we reopen that kind of possibility again? The Grenadian Prime Minister talking about the difficulty of trade. Well, I think that's the main issue right now when you're talking about that travel in between the islands. Make it so that the taxes aren't prohibitive. And if the taxes aren't prohibitive, then private airlines would fly the route because more people would want to go. That seems to be the logical progression of that to me. Tell me what you think, though. Do you think that reducing the airfare is the key to increasing that inter-island trade? Do you think that if we reduce the taxes on airfare inter-island in the Caribbean, we would see for the Caribbean jointly an increase in the tourism? Would that lead to a benefit, or would that lead to a more of a disadvantage for the governments because they would be losing so much money? The way I figure, if no one is flying to your island because of the prohibitive cost, then you aren't making those tax dollars. You could tax 100% of the airfare, but if no one is flying there, then you get 100% of nothing. If you tax none of the airfare and people are flying there, you may get nothing still, but when they fly there, you get something. Tell me what you think. Drop a comment. That's all I have for now. I hope you're educated, informed, or entertained, and I will see you in the next video.